then the hackers could be directly attacking your network intentionally, because viruses, trojans and worms, if they are simple types of those entities, viruses or worms or trojans, they are not actively being controlled by a hacker. They've been released and they could be doing their job independently, and nobody could be using them actively to harm or hurt your infrastructure. But there could be a situation where a hacker or a team of hackers is actively monitoring, trying to penetrate, and then actively trying to control your infrastructure. This is generally done when the hackers create a botnet. Once again, botnet is a term which I would encourage you to research. I'm deliberately not explaining those terms, number one, to save time, and number two, so that you'll have some homework to do. After this lecture, you'll go out on the internet and do some research and learn a few more things than I could possibly tell you during this lecture. So try to learn what a botnet is. So in this particular situation, a hacker could be sitting at the back, or hackers could be sitting at the back. They could create a botnet within your network and create a day zero attack using that botnet, or use your infrastructure in a distributed denial of service attack. So what a botnet is, what a day zero attack is, please go and research that over the internet. Simple viruses and worms and trojans, they could be independent entities that have been generated somewhere, somehow, and they reach your network, your infrastructure, they do their stuff, and they disturb some of your resources, and that's about it. Although they can be very dangerous in certain situations. However, one advantage or one good thing about them is that there is nobody sitting at the back controlling them, or trying to steal some information, or trying to harm you intentionally. So that is still acceptable, or that is still kind of less scary as compared to those worms and those trojans and viruses that exist in your network. They have created a backdoor or a trap in your network, in your infrastructure, and some hacker is accessing your infrastructure through that trap or through that backdoor. And then that hacker can do anything to your infrastructure or anything through your infrastructure to anywhere else over the internet, and you would not even know. So it is this hacker-based attacks, or when there are active hackers sitting at the back, these are even more dangerous as compared to simple worms or viruses or Trojan-based attacks. And as I was mentioning earlier, the blended attacks, where these different types of attacks are combined together, those are the most dangerous attacks to counter and control and save yourself from. The next attack that we should consider, or we should actively protect and defend ourselves against, this is the DOS attack, or these are the distributed DOS attacks. DOS or distributed DOS or DDoS attacks are the attacks whereby the prime intention or the major intention of the attacker is to render your infrastructure useless, to compromise the availability of your infrastructure. DDoS attacks are not much concerned with confidentiality or the integrity. They are concerned with the availability. They are targeting the availability of your network, which means that the genuine users cannot access the infrastructure. I remember the way back about 18 or 20 years back in 1999, there was a major attack on the internet which targeted all the major online service providers, including Amazon and eBay and Google and Yahoo. Google was very new those days. So it was, all these portals were attacked, and all of them were inaccessible for almost 2 to 3 days. So if you are providing an online service and because of a DDoS attack, your service is unavailable for extended period of time or even for a small period of time, that's a headline. And that is going to tarnish your reputation beyond repair, which means that it's a business loss, it's a revenue loss for you, and as an online service provider, you cannot afford that. So if an online retailer goes down, indirectly this means that the business is going down. Similarly, if a bank is compromised or bank's network infrastructure is compromised and the users cannot access their online accounts, that's business loss for the bank. So DDoS attacks are primarily targeting the infrastructure availability, whether those are servers, storage, or network. In older days, the DDoS attacks used to be simple. They would only choke the network bandwidth because network bandwidths were limited, and it was easier to choke the network bandwidths by simply generating a ping attack. By generating a lot of ping, by generating a ping broadcast, they could choke the link bandwidths. However, because the link bandwidths are also very big now, are immense, so it's difficult to choke the entire link bandwidth. Secondly, the ping attacks are very simple and they are very easy to handle. So you won't see any ping attacks in your network. Most probably, you won't see any ping attacks in your network. However, the attacks today, DDoS attacks today, are more sophisticated. They could be targeting the transport layer, as you can see here, the SYN flood attack, where you are just a minute. SYN flood attacks, which is at the transport layer using the TCP protocol, a vulnerability or a weakness of the TCP protocol, in which you generate a lot of synchronization or SYN packets with the SYN flag set, SYN flag value 1, which in other words means that you are trying to open a lot of connections with the server. The server sends you, if you understand the three-way TCP handshake, you send a SYN packet or a SYN segment, you receive a SYN ACK, and then you have to send an ACK. So you just keep sending the SYN messages and you don't send the ACKs to the server or to the resource that you are accessing. So it leaves a lot of half-open TCP connections, which can leave the server useless for the genuine users, because the server becomes overloaded and it cannot serve the genuine users. So similarly, if you can have HTTP flood attacks, DNS flood attacks, or UDP flood attacks, or certain other types of attacks, these attacks can actually target your resources, and then the availability could be compromised. And once again, I encourage you to go out and read about the different types of DDoS attacks, different type of flood attacks, and that will help you understand the internal working of the protocols as well. And there is a separate Huawei course on DDoS, Huawei product. You can study that as well. That will also give you a lot of insight into different types of DDoS attacks and how to counter them. As we discussed earlier in this session, that there are certain threats or there are certain compromises in your network security or infrastructure security that is a result of mere foolishness or the mere simplicity of users. Because the users are not very conscious or aware about the security threats that are out there. They do silly things, and as a result of that, their systems are compromised, and ultimately as a result, the entire network or the entire infrastructure could be compromised if proper checks and if proper security measures not implemented in the infrastructure. And this is going to affect the efficiency, and once the threat has entered or once the malicious software has entered your infrastructure, they can spread into anywhere within your internal network. And this could result into confidentiality as well, leakage of confidential and corporate information, which could once again result in business loss. This normally happens with peer-to-peer networks or peer-to-peer communication or IM communication, instant messaging communication, which users do. So be very careful within your organization when you deploy the policy. And in fact, some of the organizations, when they hire some new employees, part of their onboarding process or part of their awareness process, it includes information security awareness as well. They not only tell them what are the processes, what is the time at which you come to the office, what is the dress code, where you eat your lunch. They also tell them how to make sure that organization's information security is not compromised because of any silly behavior from the new employees. So that's actually part of their onboarding, new employee onboarding process. So this could be something which you guys could consider within your organizations or within your customer organizations. If you're consulting your customers on IT security, this could be one area you could help or support them with. And another very important aspect or very, very threatening aspect of this is that because the users are not aware, they do foolish things, they do silly things, and because our IT departments are also not very smart, they are also not adept, or they are also not prepared to catch those silly actions by the users. So that's what you call in English the double whammy or the double jeopardy, that the users are also not very aware and the security departments are also not up to date. So if the security departments are not doing their job well, then the threat multiplies. So all in all, if we look at the types of threats or the trends of attacks in the IT industry today, we will see that the types of attacks have changed over the past few years. As I mentioned earlier, that probably 15-20 years ago, the types of attacks were very simple. The attackers would be targeting most probably your network layer or your transport layer, using the network and transport layer vulnerabilities. But now attackers are attacking or targeting your applications or your content or the services that you are running within your network. And because these attacks are more sophisticated, they are always on the lookout for discovering the vulnerabilities. And there are tools available which are constantly running, and they are constantly trying to discover the vulnerabilities in the system. And as soon as a vulnerability is discovered, they are going to report and most probably automatically generate an attack against that vulnerability. So as an administrator, it is very important for us to remain a step ahead of the attackers, which is very difficult, but that is what we need to do. We have to make sure that we do patching of our operating systems timely, we do timely patching of our antivirus, we do timely upgrade of our IPS signature databases. So it is very important that we keep upgrading our security infrastructure components so that whenever there is a threat or whenever there is a vulnerability, we can catch that in time, because the time between a vulnerability being discovered and the time between an attack being generated against that vulnerability, that time is squeezing, that time is diminishing, which means that now we have very less time to respond to vulnerabilities, because the attackers have become so expert, or the types of attacks have become so advanced, that it does not leave us, the administrators, security administrators, much time to protect ourselves. So we have to be as smart as the attackers and as sophisticated as the attackers.